At IMTC World, innovators are everywhere. Luis Buenaventura talked to us about Bitcoin and its use for sending money.
So if you look at the way that traditional remittances work, there's this tendency where in order for Western Union to make a very quick remittance within minutes, they have to pre-fund a huge amount of money in the Philippines to make sure that the money is already sitting there waiting to get disbursed to the final beneficiaries. What Bitcoin allows you to do is you don't have to do this pre-funding anymore. So the capital doesn't have to get tied up in all of your destination countries. Instead, you use Bitcoin to settle each remittance as it happens, which is so much more efficient from both a financial standpoint and from a operation standpoint. It's so much more efficient than having to pre-fund a huge amount of money at the start. And that's kind of like the most important part of it. It's allowed young startups like us who don't have access to a lot of capital to get into this industry because we're literally only moving whatever the money that the customer asks us to move is. We don't have to predict how much money we're going to need for a given week and have that huge amount of capital ready on the other end. So a Bitcoin transaction is kind of, it's a little bit like email. So if it were possible in your imaginings to attach money to an email, that's the closest thing that Bitcoin can do. Emails don't require permission from anyone in order to get sent or received. So similarly, Bitcoin is the same. You can send Bitcoin money to anyone who also has a Bitcoin address. So it's similar to an email address. Doesn't look as easy to read as an email address, unfortunately, but it's analogous. So you can send it with the same ease that you send an email. And once that Bitcoin Cash has arrived at that person's address, you can't take it back anymore. Also in the same way that you can't take back an email. So you need to be, a little bit more certain about making payments with Bitcoin. It's in that manner, it's different from PayPal, where you can sometimes argue to reverse a transaction. Well, so there's a lot of different Bitcoin operators and business models and things like that. I guess that one of the challenges is just the regulatory hurdles. If you look at the backgrounds of Bitcoin founders like myself or like some of the other attendees in this conference, we tend to come from a technology background. We don't tend to come from a banking background. And if we had come from a banking background, we would have known from day one that regulation is something that we need to really pay close attention to and have a real plan for. The thing is, we were excited about the technology, so we built the thing, and then we started doing the research about regulatory requirements and things like that. And all of this information is available. You just have to know where to access it, and you have to know how to comply with it. So I think that maybe the biggest challenge is just learning it. And if there are additional costs to the regulatory, these regulatory requirements, then you have to be ready for stuff like that. So it's becoming more obvious now, but back in the early days, maybe 2-3 years ago, it wasn't quite so obvious that you really needed to, have this as part of the funds that you would need to raise as a young startup. Well, that problem is always going to be there when you have a new technology or you have a new approach to doing anything. I can tell you that the methods that we're coming up with to build trust with our customers is very similar to the methods that probably Western Union did when they were, young. I guess that must have been 100 years ago or something like that. In other words, you have to be straightforward, you have to be transparent. When you make a promise to your customers, you have to be sure that you keep it, regardless of whether you lose money on that transaction or not. So it's the same kind of things. The interesting thing about the market that we are kind of swimming around in, the migrant worker remittance market, Filipinos tend to be very communal. So when they are living in countries that they are not, originally from, they tend to really come together. If you can find 1 or 2 people within those communities that can speak well of your company and speak well of your service, oftentimes word of mouth is actually quite powerful, and that's kind of I suppose that's like the low budget way of marketing. If you're like a young startup, you don't really have a lot of cash to throw at advertising. So what you do is you hope that you are good enough or interesting enough that one or two people within these communities will give you a shot. And if they like your service, they really do endorse it. So, I mean, that's kind of how we were building our user base. So this is my second one. I first attended the Vegas one earlier this year. I've really enjoyed both of them, and I'm constantly amazed by the kind of people that I meet here, both from a business partnership perspective and from a knowledge perspective. I feel like we're kind of able to pull together quite a really diverse crowd. Diverse in terms of backgrounds, but we're all interested in the same topic. So it's always been a really informative and exciting experience for me.
Great. Okay, thank you so much.